Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. Tonight is some Monday. It's July 27th, according to my computer. But regardless of what day it is, I have with me my esteemed panel. First, the esteemed Mala. Welcome, Mala. Mala won't be doing too much talking. She's mostly here for moral support, but we're glad that she's here. Next, the esteemed Tracy.
Hello.
So Tracy will be doing talking. She's not here for moral support. Finally, the esteemed Tom.
Good evening, everyone.
Tom is actually here for immoral support, so kind of balancing things out, because this is kind of a balanced podcast in video form. Can't believe I just called it a podcast. If this weren't live, I would totally cut and do another take. But
Podcast.
we're doing it live, people. So, with that in mind, tonight's topic, am I taping this? Sadly, yes. All of our Shop Talk episodes go onto YouTube in the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group list. So you can go back and watch me make a fool of myself week in and week out.
Over and over and over again if you want to.
Yep. You don't even need a bloopers reel because you just play the thing straight and it'll work.
Yeah, but you can just repeat it over and over, you know.
Oh,
just
absolutely.
have fun all day long.
You know, we're at a point where we've done enough episodes that you could play and get angry at me for your entire workday, and just keep playing different episodes. How will the tape fit in my iPod? You're gonna have to get one of those cassette tape things that can play MP3s, and then reverse engineer it, and then you'll scale down the video, take an audio recording using one of those handheld cassette recording, mini cassette microphones, and then splice in the full cassette tape in with the mini tape. You can find directions for that on my MySpace page. So, the way that Shop Talk normally works, and will work tonight as well, is that we like to take questions from the audience, answer questions, give some advice, talk about some things, try to get me to go off on a rant. And if you want to interact, Twitch chat is directly to my right, which is to your left, unless you're watching from home, in which case it's probably to your right. And you can also send an email. The email address will show up at the bottom of the screen. It will cycle through. Emails we tend to handle after episodes, so it's something to think about so that we sound more coherent than if you try to hit us live. But it's more fun if you try to hit us live. So with that, let's get started. It's underneath on the Android app. Well, so that's where chat is when you're on Android. That's good to know. If you rotate your head like this, then it'll be to your right. So our first topic of discussion this evening is Past Summit, and specifically Past Summit speakers. We have the full list of Past Summit speakers out, and it's a pretty solid list. Particularly solid is the contingency from North Carolina. What is our Twitch channel called? It's Triangle SSUG. Twitch.tv/Triangle SSUG. You're probably watching it now, unless you're on YouTube, in which case there's a link to that in the description below. Or if you're on Twitch and you just somehow wandered on here because you like cat butt. So we can't guarantee that in every episode.
On camera.
But at least you got your fix tonight. Unless Twitch takes that down for cat nudity. I don't know what their terms of service say about that.
She still has her hair on. She's not nude.
All cats must have a sufficient amount of hair. That's why there are no Manxes on Twitch. All right, so North Carolina Past Summit speakers. There are 5 of us in the RDU area, so the Research Triangle area. Tracy is actually going to be speaking. What's your topic about, Tracy?
I'm going to be speaking on mental health in the tech industry.
It is a very good talk. You've done it at quite a few SQL Saturdays, I know, and have had a chance to talk about it. About a pretty important topic.
Yes, everybody has loved the topic except for one dissenter, and he
Thank
was
you for not
brave
calling me
enough
out
to
by
leave
name.
the
No.
feedback form with me. He left it with the organizers, but everybody else has left me great feedback and even wrote compliments that they would take some stuff away and it would help them, and everything I've submitted it to has selected it so far, which is like
Had plenty of time to practice. Tom Norman also has a Past Summit session going on. What's your session all about, Tom?
There's actually 2, Kevin.
Oh my gosh, there's 2 of them.
There's 2 of them. So the first one is going to be DevOps consistent releases. And it's going to be the beginning part of SQL Server data tools, how to use it, how to get in there and put all your database objects in, and also how to source control things, how to get things into source control from a database perspective, of course. And then the second one is the art of data classification. So we're going to be talking about how to classify data and what it all means, all the terms you see when you're in the data classification tool, what it means, and what you're looking at there.
Great. Mike mentions, without great dissenters, how are you going to drink your wine down to the dregs? That's a good question.
I can do that anyways.
So, in addition, Jared Poche, who we've seen on Shop Talk as well as presenting for the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group, is giving a talk. Chris Voss, who sometimes we see in chat, haven't seen him yet tonight, but sometimes we get to see his presence. He's doing a talk. And also, I've got a pre-con and a talk going on. So, pretty good group from RDU. Mala is not giving a talk, but she is pretty important in the past scheme of things. So, I wanted to specifically call out, she is behind the scenes pulling all the strings. It's like the puppet in The Godfather. In the Charlotte area, there are 3 people. Melissa Coates. I believe Melissa's doing a pre-con, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right.
And if she is, hopefully she's not doing it on the same day as me, because I don't want that competition. So she's definitely doing a regular session. I think she's doing a pre-con as well. I believe Mala is checking on that now. Brad Llewellyn is doing a talk, and also Ben DeBow. And then, in the Triad area, although I would happily claim her as a Triangle area person, Angela Henry is doing a session too. So there is quite a bit of North Carolina representation at Past Summit this year. Question, do you really need to give precognitive talks? I'm going to go with a yes. I need to give the talk before I think about it. That's why my talks end up so poorly. Had I done it post-cognitively, probably would have turned out better.
The other part, Kevin, is while we're talking about who's speaking and stuff, we need to encourage people to go ahead and register and be there. The platform that we're using sounds very interesting. It's going to have the capability of doing some networking, talking about getting some game stuff going on. I've heard even some people looking at trying to get some Mario Kart, go-kart racing. That would be fun, to do. But need to encourage you, and you got 2 ways to basically pay less than what you see on the website. You can contact me, and I'll give you the virtual chapter discount code, or you can contact Kevin or Tracy or me, and we can give you the Raleigh code. Or, of course, if you're in Triad or in the Charlotte area, you can contact those organizers and they give you their discount codes. So come join us.
And Mala points out that Melissa is in fact doing a pre-con as well, so that vague recollection was correct. And I am positive that is going to be a knockdown, drag out of an event, because she is a fantastic speaker. Oh, TG is here. Howdy. Welcome to our Twitch channel. I see the bouncer let you through. I'll have to give better instructions next time. So, next topic of the night. This actually comes from Icon Pro, who hit us up at the very end of last week's episode, and we didn't have time to get to the question, but the question was all about collecting and loading structured data, where structured data here means XML or JSON. And I will be here giving what I'll call the value neutral version, whereas my esteemed panelists are going to totally be me and cut me off in the middle of this and talk about why this is such a bad idea. So I probably shouldn't have said that up front. It's more effective when they just do it, but I wanted to set the scene because I don't want you thinking that I think this is a great idea. Okay, XML. Been around in SQL Server for quite some time. Go back to SQL Server 2000, we had XPath support. We had the ability to query XML as string data. 2005 gives you an XML data type, where you could, if you really wanted to, store XML data in a way that is supposed to be a bit more efficient than just storing it as string data. Furthermore, you have the ability to create indexes off of that data. So that way you can query the XML data more efficiently than if you just did a bunch of substrings and likes and scanned through the data. JSON comes into play in SQL Server 2016. In this case, there is no data type. It's just varchar or in varchar. So you just use regular textual columns, not text though, you know what I'm saying. And you can query this using OpenJSON in order to parse the text. And TG mentions don't add too much data to those tables. Yeah, that's part of the problem that I'm not going to talk about because Tracy and Tom are supposed to cut me off and talk about it.
Yeah, we was just going to let you talk and then just, do it at the end.
Well, that's not cutting me off.
Oh, okay. Well, XML is terrible. You get
all right, why is XML terrible?
It gets really big. It doesn't query well. And then you got people that'll just stick it in varchar, not really stick it in an XML data type. Things I've seen. Tom's comments.
I don't like XML. I think it's harder to. It's a good way to basically pass data around, but I think JSON's gotten a lot better in that area. But you still have performance issues. And one thing, Kevin, we did not talk about, because I left it on purpose, is that we actually use a JSON data type, and it is actually encrypted with always encrypted. And your problem there is you cannot query the individual elements.
Right, because the string itself is encrypted.
That sounds like such a terrible idea, Tom. Who designed that one?
Not me. One of my developers.
That's why I asked, so you could say that.
Yeah, so, not me.
I can defend that.
But one of the reasons they did encrypt it is because when he was talking to me, I didn't realize he's putting in JSON, but he did it because there's PI and HIPAA data in the data when it's stored. So, from that standpoint, yeah, you should probably encrypt it because you got the full PI or HIPAA data within that string. But the bad part is now they can't query it the way they want to query it. So, and you can't move it anywhere. You can't put it in a temp table. You can't do anything with it. It's basically, you can query it. Yeah, you can get the data the way you want it, but you're looking at the entire string.
So I can defend that with a specific access pattern. And that specific access pattern is the database doesn't care about the format. It just takes the data, sends it back to the application. The application can deserialize. As far as you're concerned, the database, I'm never querying on that. I'm never filtering on it. It is essentially a blob of text which has no inherent structure as far as my queries are concerned, that I will hand back off to the application and let it continue on its merry way. And if that's your access pattern,
I'm not letting you have all my PII data that way. You never know. The application could be all fudged up and you're going to have a major data leak and we're going to be on Troy Hunt's website.
The problem with ours is that in the JSON field I'm talking about, basically, it is not in the application at all. Because we have microservices and you have eventual consistency. You don't have, I know from a database DBA perspective, we're like going eventual consistency. That sounds horrible.
Someday.
And and it can be if things don't work. But what happens is if it doesn't work, then basically they capture the data string that they're trying to do something with in JSON and they stick it in this field. And basically we only look at it from the back end. So there is no application to do anything with it.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then fine, it's a bad idea. All right,
It's a bad idea.
I still think it was a bad idea if you had an application and you sent all your PII data that way, the whole blob over there.
Well, the application is going to be able to decrypt that data regardless.
Everything should be in stored procedures with where clauses and all that good fun stuff.
What's a stored procedure?
Sorry about that. Internet connection has been a complete train wreck for the past couple of weeks. It's a good thing I pay so much money for it. So, coming back on things, Solomon mentioned that it's not supposed to be smaller. XML types are definitely more compact than the same XML data as string types, though the amount of savings depends on how repetitive the tag and attribute names are. And I would add to that how bad you are with XML indexes, too. So, Raymond mentions third normal form. Who cares about that?
Ooh.
There's a question in there, and the question in there, it goes back to my point of, look, if I'm never doing anything with that information, if it's not information that's intended for a database or that's intended for use within a database, then it can still be in third normal form. It's how, for example, a product description can be in third normal form despite the fact that it's got a whole bunch of separate words and separate sentences and may have separate sections, and it may have a structure of its own, but I don't care about that from the standpoint of querying it. And so the product description itself can be just a straight up attribute in third normal form. So it can still be fine in that regard. Now, once you talk about shredding that data, then we're on the same page. And now you're saying, wait, this is no longer third normal form because you're regularly shredding that information. And in that regard, that's where it starts getting to be kind of sketchy. XML data type is right next to auto shrink. I think they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of where they are alphabetically, but I think you're right, TG, on where they are in terms of desirability. gRPC data objects that you can query. You know, you joke about that, Raymond, but I could see that. I could buy that. The problem is getting all those SSL certificates set up. There's the real pain. So Icon Pro, who originally asked the question, said, we don't know if we like JSON and SQL yet. I will say that my experience is that it's been... it's not something I would use very frequently. It's okay in certain circumstances when I just don't have any better way to do it. I actually do store data as JSON, where I've got essentially a time series string of data for large numbers of individual products, and I don't want to run the grouping query every time. It's like I do the aggregation, I store the aggregates in JSON, and I send them back out to the reporting application that actually shreds that JSON and displays the information. I don't look at that information within SQL Server. It's just there because I needed a way to get several dozen elements in one place without having to take the extra complexity of like turning a table with 10 million rows into one with 700 million rows.
Kevin,
Yes.
while we were gone, we were talking about basically that the way we use it is basically for a microservice failure. Okay. And in that particular case, as we're passing data in between the different microservices, if you have a failure, you may not necessarily know, or it's not going to be in the same exact format. So it comes in very handy going into JSON because of the different formats of data from the microservice failure, because you different pieces. And so what happens is then we can turn around and query that and figure out basically, okay, troubleshoot it and figure out, okay, here's the data they were trying to send over. Here was the issue of why it didn't go, why it failed.
Right.
So from that aspect, it works very well, but it's not in an application.
Right. That's a good case for it. Another possible good case for it is you have data that you're pulling in for staging operations. And you can have a table that is just, here's the JSON dump of data, and then I'm going to go through it and turn it into properly normalized, well-defined relations. TG mentions that XML was designed.
You're talking to a lot of DBAs basically that we love structured data. We don't like unstructured data.
Yes. Although XML and JSON are still structured data. So XML was designed to exchange data between incompatible systems, not to store data. JSON was designed to send data to web browsers and not to store data. It's true. They're data interchange mechanisms. I mean, CSV files also designed to exchange data between systems, not to store it.
But those was the first database they taught me how to use in college.
CSV.
There's a Mongo joke in here somewhere.
I love CSV. Over Excel.
If you're gonna love CSV, you might as well like JSON or XML, because there are fewer problems with JSON and XML for data storage. The biggest problem is just the explosion in size, in file size.
It's mainly like you were saying, though, even a CSV, it's basically the uses I've seen is move data from one system to another. So, but you'd always end up with, at least in the old Excel world, I don't have this driver, I don't have that driver, this won't load because of access, whatever. I'm like, oh, really? So.
Yeah. So the question is, any native T-SQL methods for JSON other than the for JSON? So you have a couple of options in there, and Open Row Set and Open JSON, if I remember right, are the couple of ways to access data. And then from there, it'll essentially give you a structure that you can cross apply to pull out the different nodes and elements, and you can perform your queries. In the show notes, I'll drop in a couple of links to good resources for getting started on that.
The other one, Kevin, is going to be JSON value. If you're looking for a specific value in the JSON string, so you don't have to be looking at the entire, just as long as it's not encrypted, you don't have to be looking at querying the whole entire string. You can say, show me the customer name, where the customer name equals X or Y or Z or whatever.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Raymond asks, what is your favorite format for extraction and archival? And
Delete.
What's your favorite format, Tom?
Delete.
Ah,
You have
spoken as
you
a
have
true
your
DVA.
you have your backups, right? So you've been saving 7 years worth of backups. You take your monthly backups, your yearly backups. Why do you need to save that data? You can go get it from the backups. Delete the stuff. That's I changed my thought pattern about 7-8 years ago.
All data should be deleted. Change my mind.
If you've got good solid backups and you can restore them, then you've got a way to go retrieve it. Tracy's going, no, don't delete it.
Tom's format is backup files, SQL Server backups. What have you got, Tracy? Tracy's on mute.
You're on mute.
Well, I like to think she's got laryngitis.
At my company, we can't delete data. We just can't because of regulations and stuff. But I like the idea either move it off to another server, or Tom's ideal, stick a backup somewhere and go get it when you need it. Because most of the time you don't need it after a certain number of years, and people say they do and they don't, and then you just end up with these big databases and this much of it being used.
Yeah, that's the thing that I notice is even, because I have to go pull, we do training for companies, compliance training. So, like, for example, sexual harassment or anti-harassment. Well, if someone harasses someone and does a suit or whatever the case against the company, then we've got to go pull that training out that they actually did and stuff. So, but very rarely have I gone back a year or two. I don't really go back that much more. So you've got the nearline, offline. Another one, Kevin, that we talk about if you really want to do it, but I've heard from a Microsoft Premier support, it's very expensive, but you can always do the Azure cold storage, and push the data up into Azure.
You don't want to use StretchDB,
don't
or is that still not available?
Kevin says no.
I'm just kidding. I was kidding on that one.
Oh, I'm not kidding. Hard pass. Hard pass.
Has anybody used it?
Has anybody ever been able to afford it? That's the first question in chat.
Well, that is and that's what the Premier support guy said is you really can't afford it.
No.
And the sad part is that's really a brilliant concept by Microsoft if they just make it affordable.
Yeah, so when it came out, when it was in preview, a lot of people liked the idea. It's like, oh, this is okay. It's got problems, but it's a decent concept.
And I haven't heard about it since it came out.
Yeah, because when it came out, basically you had to spin up Azure SQL Data Warehouse with premium storage at the top end to be able to store the data that you care about the least. So you're spending a huge amount of money on data that you admit that you don't care about.
So you tell me that the Microsoft thought is lacking. Yeah.
In that case, yes. Now, TG is hitting on something that is a really good, viable solution for long-term data storage, and that is S3 Glacier or Blob Storage, the cold storage version. So
Azure Blob Storage?
Yeah, so Blob Storage has hot tiers and cold tiers, which was in response to AWS coming out with Glacier. And with Glacier, essentially, it's very cheap to put data in. It gets a lot more expensive and a lot slower to pull data out. If you want your data out pretty fast, it costs you a whole lot more money. But for something like a backup, in the cases you're talking about with litigation, you don't need that back the next day or the next hour. If it's a day, 2 days, no big deal.
You're okay. Yeah.
And in that case, this is different from StretchDB. StretchDB was a great idea and a train wreck implementation. Storing your data in that cold tier, yeah, that works fine. I have a chalkboard behind me. No, this is actually a green screen that I use for video content, but when I'm not using it, instead of taking it down, I just leave it up behind me so that I get half of a green screen effect.
The question is, a lot of times to me, I've heard, real-time data, nearline data, offline data. You've heard those concepts before. And I think one of the things that you really have to look at is like, we actually, before they came out with partitioning way back in 2000, created our own partitioning. And our product at that time was basically a credit card system. And they really mainly used just the data that came in that day. That's what they really wanted to concentrate on. Then you would have that month. So we turned around and spun tables off and partitioned it by month. And probably by the second month, definitely by the third month, nobody's looking at the data anymore. They don't care. They've already done all their expense reports, done all their allocation and all that kind of stuff. They could care less.
Yeah, and the term is Glacier Deep Archive. That's the cheapest variety. And that works well if, again, your use case is, I don't need it soon. I need to store a huge amount of data, and maybe once a year I'll need to pull something back, and I can wait 2 or 3 days for it to come back. If that's your use case, that's a pretty good strategy. It's cheaper than most anything else.
My question is almost like my current database environments ever since I've been there, because we've been talking about archiving for years now. We don't do any archiving at all. So I've got a database with data from back in 2007, but now you have the other thing to bring up to people is you got to really think about what you're going to archive and what you're going to keep, because you now have CCPR, the California Privacy Act, and you're soon going to have other privacy acts and stuff like that. So if you've got the type of data that I can call you and say, I need you to delete all the data about me, then every place that you're storing that data and keeping that data, you're going to have to go take care of it. So you really need to think long and hard about retention of data.
So the reason I kind of demur here is I'm waiting for the first and second round of lawsuits to make their way through, because
Correct.
there are so many open things. I mean, it was patterned after GDPR, and there are so many open things about GDPR, so many things where I expect it to go through the courts and to get understood in a clearer way, because the things that were written out in the directive were, how do I want to call it, fluffy?
I don't know whether you're ever going to have a clear answer, Kevin, because one case is going to probably rule one way and the next case is going to rule a different way. And the typical lawyer speakease, legalese that's going to change things around on you. You might have some solid stuff, but you're going to have stuff that's very fluid also.
There will end up being statute. There will end up being splitting GDPR versus whatever happens in the US, because legal systems are quite different, and I am not at all qualified to talk about any legal system in Europe. I'm also not qualified to talk about any in the US, but I'm still going to do it. And you'll get establishment of precedent in the US that the different levels of courts are going to have to basically eventually agree upon, and they'll kick it up to the Supreme Court a few times. They'll come up with a mush of an answer, kick it back down to lower courts, and like 15 years from now, we'll get it figured out just in time for nobody to care anymore.
Yeah, of course, you need to, The problem is right now it's not being addressed from the federal level. It's only being addressed from the state level, and you're going to have so many different variations there. So, yeah, and most of us have customers throughout the U.S. We don't have them just in, throughout one country. So, but I will tell you from a credit card, when I worked for the credit card company, if you don't believe your data is already out there, and who has data privacy, none of us have data privacy. It's already out there on the black market, already there. So I don't know how we're ever going to, ever get, they'd say, well, it'll take care of it in the future, but you're not gonna be able, you may be able to delete data out of your local database, but you're not gonna be able to delete it if somehow it's gotten to the black market.
Yeah. Mike mentions there's a way to use a forward hash of PII. Okay. That's fair. That's fair.
A forward hash of PII, like.
Yep, and I'm gonna just glide over that.
Okay.
Mostly because I don't understand it well enough to describe it without making a clown of myself, even more of a clown than usual.
I guess I haven't heard that, and I speak on that topic quite frequently. So,
but going back to Raymond's question of format for extraction and archival, you're not talking about storing the data in another database somewhere. If you actually want to pull it out and archive it, it does depend on the data structure. So, for example, if you're dealing with columnar data that you expect to aggregate a lot, Parquet and Orc tend to be the two file formats of choice. If you are dealing with a lot of row store data, Avro is a solid format. It doesn't have as many of the problems that CSV does or that delimited files do, where the delimiter is also a character quite often.
Right.
Like comma separated values, I understand why you have comma separated values, but considering how frequently commas get used in English, that's not a great delimiter. And pretty much any delimiter you can think of gets used often enough that you end up having problems. Yes, Anders mentions tilde, and I was also thinking pipe, and you can come up with different characters. Right. Vertical tab. Vertical tab's less commonly used, but it's not going to be easy to find a character which is an appropriate separator, easy to understand in modern systems. I mean, we can go back and talk about 1960s systems and how they had separators. Tab delimited, well, tab delimited doesn't work if you have, say, a description that has tabs in it. And so like Mala's writing here, in actual data, such as tab, if it shows up in your actual data, that's troublesome. There are ways to get around it, except that there's no actual imposed standard, and pretty much any system you use, you're at the mercy of whether the system actually implements ways to escape out. ASCII value 31 is intended for this purpose. And that's what I was thinking of when I was joking about going back to the 1960s. Unit separator, I believe, is what it's called. Yep.
It's also interesting that, when I've tried to bring data out of the database, it always seems like I run into problems because of exactly what you're talking about. There's some piece of data somewhere, and if you don't have it today, you're going to have it 2 years from now when you're trying to do it, and all of a sudden your process blows up because someone's entered data that you're doing delimiters and stuff on like that.
Yeah, and with ASCII 31, the problem there again is, does the tool that you're using allow you to use that character? Does the tool that you're using allow you to see it as a separator? And unfortunately, not always. And TG mentions Unicode issues around it, possibly. I only say possibly because I'm not sure. Anders says fixed length works all the time, sorta, until you need something that's longer than the length that you have. And then you have staggered, where the last column can be however long you want it to be, but everything else is fixed length. Until you need 2 columns that can be varying lengths. So, yeah, I do prefer something like Avro. I would not be too opposed to storing data in XML, JSON, YAML format. Jagged, I'm sorry, jagged, not staggered. Thank you, Icon Pro, for the correction. So, if your system can easily parse that XML or JSON data, and you're not talking about enormous amounts, then if you're dealing with row store data and you don't want to use Avro, it's an option. I never liked Jagged enough to remember the name appropriately. That's my excuse. Okay, next topic. We're going to talk about secrets. How do you store and use secrets in PowerShell? This is actually an old question, really old question. Comes from the very beginning of Shop Talk, and I've just had it sitting in here, saving it for a special occasion. And I figured, what more special day than today? Talk about secrets with PowerShell. So, Raymond mentions vaults. Yeah, that's an option. Like HashiCorp's Vault product it's a good product. You can definitely implement that for a good on-premises key vault solution. Azure has Key Vault, AWS has their key management, and PowerShell has some secrets management. And Tracy was mentioning about that pre-stream, so I'm going to hand it off to Tracy to talk for a minute.
Well, I've seen where Rob Sewell blogged about some PowerShell secret management stuff that I'll have to look at to remember the exact name of it. But it allows PowerShell to keep your passwords secretly for you, so you don't have to, give out all your secrets to everybody. And the only way I've ever done that before was to hash the passwords into something and send in a passphrase. So I think it's kind of neat that PowerShell gives you a way to do it, and then you've got all the different ways you can do it in Azure already built in, but to be able to do it kind of local to your system and be able to do it is kind of neat.
Yeah. Dropped a link in the chat from Curated SQL where I linked to 2 of Rob's posts on the topic. So that way you got to see all of his notebooky goodness.
Oh, yeah. He loves to put everything in notebooks now.
So you could also even encrypt using secure strings and save the encrypted string locally. Save that as a file. If it's something like a key that you really want, you obviously don't want it in plain text anywhere, but you want to regularly use it in PowerShell, and you want to store that encrypted file on a server someplace. Secure strings can work. It's not going to be as good as using something like a key vault or vault, but if you're in a pinch and you just need something, that's an option. Solomon wraps us up on XML. He says that XML is fine for exported data because it contains the schema and it can be gzipped to save space. Which is true, yes. I mean, it is, like I said, it's a good data interchange format. And if I'm storing that data with the intent that eventually I may have to bring it back into a system that wasn't the original system, that is a definite positive for XML format. With JSON, I don't get the schema necessarily, but there's less schema to deal with. And if I have a sophisticated enough system, I might be able to import that data pretty easily without quite as much of the structure as XML gives. But Yeah, they're perfectly solid options in specific use cases.
The one question I would, going back to that for a moment, Kevin, the one question I would have would be is if you've got a lot of tables that are kind of foreign keyed to each other and all that kind of stuff, and you're sending it off via JSON or whatever, unless you're joining all those tables to send it to the JSON, if you were trying to get it back into the original table, you might have some difficulty there.
This is true. And what I'm imagining is less of poor man's backup and more of I've got a denormalized query result that I want to write out because analysts are going to need this information later, or analysts might potentially need this information later, or some application that has not been written may need to read this data for some reason. Or I may need to send it to someplace else where I don't know that they'll have SQL Server 2019, this CU, or later available to them. So
would you ever, talking about that and getting, because we're basically talking about archiving data there, would you ever take it from a standpoint of partitioning the data and then letting it roll off or whatever the case may be after a period of years or whatever the case may be?
Sure. Yeah, if that's one of those cases where, look, I need the data for, or I expect that I might need the data. I don't have a strict use case for the data. Yeah, you could do that. Now, if you have a feeling that you're really going to use the data again, I agree with everybody who's saying have an archive server, have an archived version of SQL Server that has an archive database. It can be on slower storage. It can be junky equipment. And that's going to be more efficient to query. It's going to be more effective than writing out a bunch of flat files or writing out a bunch of XML files or JSON files. Those are cases where I'm expecting that I will query the data. If the use case is more of I'm expecting that I will give the data, then I could see writing it out to structured formats.
Or you can do like I do and basically, never archive the data. You've got how many ever years worth of data in the database. Then you got to deal with performance, right? So
Sure. And with decent sized data sets or with good hardware, that's not usually too big of a consideration. When you're talking about the really high end, then may have to do other things, may need other tricks. But if we're talking millions of rows or even tens of millions of rows, in most cases, it's not the end of the world if you have a well-designed database with appropriate indexing and queries that are well written to make best use of those.
Right.
So my last topic for tonight, the short rant on architectural diagrams.
SQL data diagrams within SSMS.
Oh, I may just pivot and rant on that.
Actually,
you got me. I'm pivoting.
Actually, when I need to see basically all the foreign key relationships and I don't know them by heart on a specific database, I will go in and basically script out one table and then say go add all the related tables so I can see what everything looks like. Not the entire database, but basically I need to take a quick look, what things are. So if you don't have a nice, I can't afford the Irwin diagrammer and all that kind of fun stuff that you guys do and stuff, but you got Visio too now. So Visio, I think, brought it back. Did they not?
They did.
Yes, they did. Thank God.
I can't believe they took it away in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So Tom just forced me to completely pivot from one rant to another rant.
That's good. We can have a rant for next week already saved up for you.
That's true. That is true.
Rant
So look,
picked out for next week.
they took database diagrams out of SQL Server Management Studio, and my thought was, it's about time. All right,
And my
database
thought was,
diagrams,
why?
they're junk. It's a good concept. I want database diagrams. I want good database diagrams. The thing in Management Studio was a train wreck that didn't work half the time, and the times that it did work, it was just a slipshod mess. If you ever try to print one of those things out, you get one option basically. It's print at our mercy. If you try to include more than a few tables, the thing just explodes. If you just want an EAD style diagram, you got to do so much dragging and, well, now I need to resize everything so it actually fits in a place where a human can read it. It doesn't give you, if I want additional information, it doesn't really give you the key information that you really want in attributes. It's not very good. And
But if all I want to see is the foreign key relationships between the tables, it works pretty well.
all right, I will grant you that.
One use case for it.
By the way,
Hey,
you also
I love
need
that use case. I use it when I don't know the structure of the rest of the stuff.
well, you also need to add in these sys diagrams objects. So if you happen to be a developer trying to do this, sorry, you don't have rights to that server, so you can't create them.
They can create it on their local. They got the database.
Yeah, if they have it locally. But if I'm connecting to a server where I don't have those rights,
Correct.
it's not going to work.
Correct. Yes. And that's good, because I don't want them doing it.
I was happy when they got rid of it. Because they weren't going to maintain that thing.
Yeah, what have they changed now that they gave it back to us?
Right, they brought it back in. I think they actually had to do a couple of bug fixes to get it to work, because part of the reason it was taken out was it just wasn't working anymore. Yeah, get comfortable with sys.tables, with sys.foreign keys. A couple of people recommended dbeaver.
I love the visual of it, though. I love the visual versus all the sys tables.
Yeah, there are a couple of good websites that give you free modeling. I've used one of them. I'll link to it in the show notes because I need to dig up which one it was. SSMS has broken diagrams several times. Yes, it has. They've had to go back and fix it. It's a minor amount of dev time, but still, I'd rather they spend that dev time on something valuable. I am happy that Visio brought back reverse engineering of databases. The version that they took that out of, that was one of the dumber ideas that they had in a while. And
yes,
I do get not wanting to pay a huge amount of money for an ER diagramming tool. I don't pay money for ER diagramming tools. But I still would rather not have that in Management Studio. I'd rather it just be gone and they not even think about it. And instead, if somebody in the community wants to build a better solution, have at it. And frankly, I think it'd probably end up in Azure Data Studio, given how difficult it is to develop extensions in SSMS. But you want to do the SQL Sentry Plan Explorer route and have really cool database visualization, diagramming within SQL Server Management Studio or within Azure Data Studio. That's good. I want to see that as a community effort. I don't really want to see it as a Microsoft effort because I'd rather they spend time on stuff that's valuable. Malo would be happy. Malo would be happy if people actually used it.
Create the foreign constraints table.
I use it.
Query the system tables.
I know.
Tom uses it. That's fair. There are people who use it. So there was actually a huge backlash when it was taken out. And I
didn't care.
No,
I haven't
I
used it
was
since like SQL 2000, so
I was happy they took it out, but it's back in now. So Tom's team won this battle.
Yay!
And with that, we
If
are
you don't
going to
want to
wrap
use
up
it,
for this
just ignore
evening.
it.
Sorry, Tom?
If you
that's
don't
what I
want to
did.
use it, just ignore it.
That's what I did.
Well, that's the problem. People did ignore it and then it broke.
Yep.
It's great when, as a consultant, you need to look at your system and can't install your own tools. Yeah, I get that aspect of it, but it's still such an awful tool. I mean, that's
It's got its uses.
I don't know. Not in a system that's more than several tables. Once you start talking
You only have
about
to diagram the tables you need, not the whole database.
Well, as a consultant, you might need the whole database.
Yeah, but you're working on one section.
As a consultant, you may be working on everything.
All right. Well,
yeah,
I'm going to have to leave you. Not that we're not having a good discussion, but I've got another meeting I need to go to. So I'm going to depart from you guys, and we can follow up next week if you want.
All
or
right.
we can drop it.
thanks for coming in, Tom. We'll see you next time around.
Fun.
See you later. Have a good one.
So, Solomon mentions DB diagram. That is one of the tools. That's not the one that I was thinking of, but that is another tool. Icon Pro mentions Mermaid Diagrams, and I just learned about Mermaid Diagrams because GitPitch supports them. That's pretty decent. And basically, my recollection is you use Python to develop diagrams. So you can have code-based diagrams. And hey, let me pull in data from systables and then have those links. I'll pull in foreign key constraints and have those connect in. So you can build your own diagrams. And maybe having somebody perhaps put in a Azure Data Studio extension that uses Mermaid. Maybe that's an option. But with that, we are going to wrap up for this evening. Mala, I didn't know if you wanted to do your book corner, but since you're not going to be talkative tonight, so we'll save Mala's book corner.
Today.
Okay.
In
We'll save
mobile
Mala's
job,
book corner
sorry.
for a later week. I mean, you can go read all the books that she has recommended so far, and it'll probably take you another week. That is how you build Mermaid with Python. Yeah, I'll drop a link into that. I saw the GitPitch notes on it, and I was actually looking at it for my talk that's coming up on Saturday, but I ended up using something else instead. Also Python related. So with that, let's call it a close for this evening. So thank you, Mala, for sticking around with us tonight. Thank you, Tracy, for being here as well. Thank you, chat. You are the real MVPs. And we will catch you again next week, Monday, 7 p.m. See you then.
All right. Good night.